Further down the typography list of items, we have p.caption with some margin definitions. Now P stands for paragraph, and .caption is a class of paragraph. So caption is the name of the class. You can see where we've applied this before. We covered some of this in a section on adding images to pages. And this here is a paragraph style with the class caption applied. So let's look in the code and see how that works. So here we have the image. This is the tag for the image right there. And that image and its caption, SS Fair Sky of the Sipmar line, is contained within a paragraph. So there's the paragraph tag opening and the paragraph tag closing. So you add a class to a tag by simply typing in class equals, and then in quotes, the class name, which in this case is caption. Going back to book view, it provides us with a paragraph that styles a certain way. In this particular case, back to our style file, I'm asking for the bottom margin to be 1 EM. Now block quote. Let's have a look at a block quote in this chapter. So here we have a standard or a default Sigil block quote, which is a paragraph of text that's indented. Let's have a look at the code and see what's there. So in book view, so in code view, you can see that there's the opening of the paragraph tag of that quote with some break lines to give a soft break, and there's the closing paragraph tag, and that paragraph is contained within a block quote tag where it opens and it closes there. Now when you create an indent in Sigil, it creates a block quote and it styles it with certain characteristics. So this is called an inline style. This style could be added to our CSS file, but Sigil automatically puts this in line. So the style for this block quote is that it has a left margin here of 40 pixels, that the invisible box containing the quote has a border of none, so no border, and the padding is 0. And what this creates is a 40 pixel indent of the left margin. Now we can stylize this quote even further. In fact, there's quite a lot of different ways that you can style these types of things. But within the style file, I've included one that I particularly like. So here you see the tag block quote, dot quote. So quote is the name of the class of block quote. So let's apply quote to the block quote in our chapter and see what it looks like. Go back to the chapter. Just have our preview over here. I'm going to go to code view. There's our block quote with its style, its inline style. I'm going to remove that style completely. So there'll be nothing defining the block quote. And I'm going to type in class equals quotes and put in the class name, which is quote. Now on the right hand side here in the preview, you can see that there's a vertical grey bar being added to the block quote. Let's look at that in book view. And there it is there. Let's have a look at these definitions here and see what they do. Now, because we have no margin left defined, the default margin left for block quote will apply. So that's that margin there, which is probably about 40 pixels. What we have here is a padding left of 0.3 em. Now the padding, if you imagine there's a box containing that text, the padding is the space between the border and the inside edge of the text. So whereas margin is outside of the border, padding is inside. So apply to 0.3 em padding to give a little bit of space between the vertical grey bar, which is the left margin of the box, and the text within the box. Let's change that padding left to 0.5, and if you watch the preview on the right hand side, you'll see the change. And there it is there. If I make that padding 1 em, you'll see it more clearly. So we're just creating a greater space between the edge of the box, the left margin of the box, and the text within. I'll change that back to 0.3. Now down here in the border section, 0.3 em is the width of the left margin, the width of the border there. So let's change that to 0.5 and watch the preview on the right and see the border change. You can see there it thickened up. I'll change that back to 0.3. This part here, we're saying that the border is solid. If I change that to dotted, for example, you can see that the border becomes a dotted line rather than a solid line. So there's several different styles you can apply to borders. So I'll change that back to solid. And the final piece here, hash CCC, is a color definition, which is a light grey. There's various ways of doing colors. For example, I could change that hash CCC to the word red, and our border becomes red. I'll change that back. So lots of different ways that you can manipulate indented text known as block quote. Let's look at images. Here in the image section of the CSS, we have some definitions. Now have a look at image.floatLeft, image.floatRight. So float left and float right are classes of image, as is border. So we'll have a look at these. Over here I have an image sitting in some text. Let's have a look at the code. So here we can see some straightforward paragraphs, and here within a paragraph is our image tag. So at the moment the image is being treated as text sitting in its own paragraph. So what if we add the class float right? Go back and have a look at code view and see what's changed. So you can see that our image has floated to the right and all of the text is wrapped. I'll change that to float left in code view. And then we can see that the image is floated to the left and all of the text is wrapped. Let's add the class border to this image. Just type in class equals quotes and the class name is border. So you can see here that a thin border, a thin black border has been placed around that image. And you can see it clearly there. Back in the CSS, let's change that border to thick. And immediately you see the border thicken up. So thin and thick are words that will work, and you can also type in 10 pixels. And you'll see the border adjust appropriately, or 1em. So a variety of ways that you can add to and create the border. There's also various definitions for the border style. So let's put in dotted. And there you can see a particular style is applied to the border. So many different ways that you can manipulate items in your book using CSS. Let's change that back to solid and thin. Back to our chapter and our image, into the code view, and simply remove that class if you don't require a border. Back to book view. Here we have a div tag with the class center. A div tag's a very useful tag. Think of it as a container into which you can put other things and then manipulate the container, thus affecting its contents. Let's go and apply a div tag to the image over here and see what happens. Look into code view. There's our image tag, currently sitting in a paragraph. So I'll just simply change that to as the opening div tag and change the P to the closing div tag. So now we've got an opening div tag, an image tag, and a closing div tag. Let's look at book view and see what's changed there. So nothing much. Looks much the same. Now in our style file, our div tag has a class called center. Let's apply that to the div that we just created and see what changes. So within the div tag, I'm going to type in class equals center. Now something changed here. It's a little big to see. Let's go and have a look in book view. And then we have the image has centered within the div tag. Now the way that this works is that the margin left definition is auto, the margin right definition is auto, and you must provide an absolute width, which I've given a 600 pixels because I know that my image is 520 pixels. And I know that 600 pixels will probably still fit in most readers quite neatly. So the div tag creates the centering of this image. And there's a lot of other controls that you can add to this definition to manipulate the contents of the div. In the list section, you see 3 entries. With this one here, this is the unordered list tag UL. And I'm changing the default disk type to be a circle. That's my preference. So that means that every time I create an unordered list in the whole ebook, that the list style type will be a circle. So that looks like this. So those little circles there. If I want to use disk anywhere, I can apply a class because I've created a class called disk. There's the class name, ul.disk. Disk is the class name. And their checkbox is another class name for ul, which should produce a square. Let's go and add these classes to the code and see the change. So there's our 2 list items, and you can see the 2 little circles. Code view. So there's the code for our unordered list, ul in its tag, and there's the closing ul tag. And within the tag, there's the list items, which are the bullet pointed list items. So in the ul tag, I'm going to type in class equals, quotes, and disk. And you'll see immediately that the items have changed to the more familiar bullets. Let's change that to the other class, which was checkbox. And there you see my list items have changed to be black squares. Not quite a checkbox, but something different. So I'll remove those classes now, and we'll revert back. Oops, my mistake. Let's take that quote out. And my bullet points have reverted back to circle. Now down here in the bottom, the miscellaneous section, this was a little checkbox that I made to suit one of my books. So I'll show you the easy way of applying this, but basically this is a class called checkbox. Let's go back to the chapter here. Let's create a new paragraph and introduce you to clips. Now clips is a quick way of applying styles and certain elements to your chapters. So I'm simply going to right click in the space, come up here to clips, ebook template, and there you have checkbox NBS, which means non-breaking space. I'll just click that. You can see we've created a checkbox looking item. Let's have a look at the code and see what that is. So you can see here, just make that a little clearer, that within a paragraph tag, we've inserted a span tag, a span that opens and a span that closes there. And that span has a class of checkbox. So if we'd like to add some text now to that checkbox, let's type in here checkbox list. Oops, and I see there's a break in there. Let's take that break tag out as it's pushing the checkbox text down one. And then we have our checkbox. Let's create a space. And so you could then have a list of items that somebody could tick, or just be aware it was a kind of a checkbox looking item. Back to book view, and then you can see our checkbox sitting there looking like a checkbox. So clips are a useful way to define and apply certain styles. I create a new space there and right click. You can see that the ones I've set up some that are defined within the ebook template. Caption text checkbox we've just looked at. There's your block quote. There's the div that we looked at. The horizontal rules, half width and footnote. Insert some text that gives you the class, the framework of a class into which you would insert the class name. And then you can insert other classes here. So experiment with those and see what they create. And Sigil also has some default clips which you can use here in the text. You can right click and insert paragraphs, heading 1s, heading 2s, and other items. It's a section called infill text, so you can insert placeholder text, the Latin placeholder text that you see here. Miscellaneous, that's where we find our horizontal rule, our soft break, there's our div and other items. And in styles, there's some other items here. You can find clips up in the menus and insert clips, and in tools you'll find a clips editor, and this is where you can add clips and manipulate clips, but perhaps that's something for another tutorial. This was part 2 of a 2-part tutorial on using CSS within the ebook template.